If you read that carefully, you'll understand what they're saying. That is why many persons were concerned that it was experimental in nature. Read that carefully over on your own. Welcome to the Alarmist Report from Healthy Reforms. I am Joel Grant, and we will be touching on some of the current events, some of the latest news that have been circulating, and we'll be looking at how they definitely will impact, are currently impacting us as it pertains to the future, prophetic future, last day events, and we'll be unfolding the implication of some of these events. Many of them are manifested in different ways. In Romans chapter 13 verse 11, it says, "And that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we first believed. The time is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light." So that tells us knowing the time in which we're living in. And the time in which we're living in is really characterized by some interesting things. As we can see, the topics that we'll be focusing on for this report covers three different things. However, we'll be touching on the fact that there are many things that we can be fearful of living in these times. We can be fearful of Ebola. We can be fearful of Corona. We can be fearful of COVID-19. We could also be fearful of monkeypox, and we could be fearful of terrorist attacks. We could be fearful of gun threats, gun violence. So many things to really captivate our minds and our attention, and that can create anxiety. However, there is something more dangerous to be feared than all these actual physical elements, all these physical manifestations. The scripture says the invisible things of God are clearly seen. And so it somewhat gives the impression that the invisible things are what we should be more concerned about. The invisible thing, because whatever we now see came from something that was not seen, that is not seen. And I would like to let you know that some of the most interesting things that we should be more scared of compared to COVID-19, compared to coronavirus, compared to Ebola, is that which we do not see. And what are some of those things that we do not see? We do not see this very key thing. We do not pay attention to this very key thing, and it is actually laws. The laws are what are of critical importance. Laws being passed can either restrict, laws being passed can either allow. They can restrict or they can allow. And so but we understand that the laws passed are also responsive to certain circumstances, and we have to be very mindful of that. But at the same time, Isaiah 10 verse 1 warns that what? Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, that make grievous prescriptions. And though that word decree directly refers to laws. And so if it is now, we're at a time wherein persons are really conscious about what's happening around them, then we have to pay attention to the laws that are being passed. They cannot be overlooked, they cannot be ignored, because they play a great role. And we can clearly understand that, especially after 2021 and the things that we saw occurring during that time. We saw greater restrictions on freedoms of movement, the great restrictions on access to certain services. It was all these were affected by sayings, by declarations, as we would say. And for us as Seventh-day Adventists, we have always been concerned about a Sunday law, to the point, to the effect that this, as validified by Revelation chapter 13 verse 14, where it states that the second beast saying to them that dwell on the earth, that alone, that sentence alone, saying to them that dwell on the earth, when it's corroborated with Daniel 4, coming from an authoritative body, that word saying actually means law or decree. Coming from an authoritative source, it means law or command or declaration. And so we see that the second beast, pointed out as United States of America, says to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast. And so Seventh-day Adventists have always been concerned about this. But now we see that there's some other laws that are slowly coming into prominence. It is not necessarily Sunday law. They're somewhat inroads to that Sunday law. But what we see here is that we have some laws that have somewhat set the stage for some of the oppression and the restriction. So to take a look at the principle of laws and the effect that they can have, we're going to draw from an author and a historian. His name is A.T. Jones. He's actually one of the Adventist pioneers, but he had some very interesting writings, a very good mind. And I'd like to share that with you before we actually get into the principle, the different topics that we'll be touching on today and the laws that are there. On the HealthyReforms.com website, you'll find an article. It's called Then and Now, The Rights of the People, Part 2. And from that article, you'll learn some very interesting things about laws. It gives you an interesting perspective that you probably never held before. And he said some very interesting things, and I'm going to share it with you before we get into the topics so that you can know and understand how to value or interpret laws, all right? Especially as it pertains to Christian persecution and last day events, and how it was that, especially in the Dark Ages, so many persons were affected. All right, let's go. So it says, if the principle be admitted that the state has the right to legislate in regard to religion and enforce religious observances, then no blame can ever be attached to the Roman Empire for putting Christians to death. Nor can it be admitted that such dealings with Christians was persecution. The enforcement of right laws can never be persecution. Well, in the eyes of God, it would be unjust because you're murdering persons for their opinion. But if you understand in the context of, in the eyes of men, they're considered laws, and laws must be obeyed, right? Right. So it says, the enforcement of right laws can never be persecution. However severely the law may deal with the offender. To hang a murderer is not persecution. So you see, the stage is being set by the laws that we're currently embracing, whether certain groups will be persecuted or not. And we have to carefully consider if we want to go down this direction. Because if we see at this moment that persons are treating as second-class citizens for not accepting a vaccine, not allowed to travel, not allowed to, especially those in Canada, if they want to board a plane and you're not, they have to fill out a form. They want to cross the border, they can't cross the border to the US. So they are literally being persecuted for their choice under the guise of the preservation of health of society. And so we will definitely be making the stretch to know that that time will come, according to Revelation chapter 13, that those other persons will be persecuted for their choice of not receiving the mark of the beast. So these laws are very important, and you can understand how it was then that even in the days of slavery in America, around the world, it was just embraced as the law. It was accepted as the common thing. So it was not deemed as something publicly condemnable. It was deemed as something publicly acceptable. And that is the danger when we begin to go down the road of certain laws. But there has been bulwarks. There are being walls that are being broken down. That is why they want to destroy the Constitution, United States Constitution. That is why they want to destroy the Declaration of Independence that grant men certain inalienable rights. You know, having reading the constitutional booklet myself, it says that the Constitution was written to protect men from good intentions. You see, laws are passed, for them to be acceptable, they have to have some guise of good. But we recognize that once it violates the principle of the Constitution, it cannot be accepted. And somehow there are clauses and there are circumstances or exemptions that gives current institution the right to somewhat overstep their boundary and make it justifiable. And so we have to be very aware of what is going to be taking place so that we can be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Hear what it says: to hunt him down, even with bloodhounds, to bring him to justice is not persecution. We repeat, therefore, that the enforcement of right laws can never be persecution, that is, in the eyes of men. If therefore religious or religious observance be a proper subject of legislation by civil government, that is why the First Amendment prevents the involvement of the civil government in religious issues. It says, then there has never been and there can never be any such thing as religious persecution. So once you give the government that power to dictate in matters of religion, then it is only at that time that the popular religion will be dictating to the government. And we know what the popular religion is. He spoke in Congress in 2015. That is the Pope, the papacy. And they have always hated the Protestants and they have always murdered the Protestants. And so it is no under any guise of friendship or for association we play down this very serious issue. It says that if we forget the events of the past, we're bound to repeat them. And many persons are acting, smiling with the fair front of the papacy, not recognizing that she never changes. It says here, because civil governments are ruled by majorities, the religion of the majority must of necessity be the adopted religion. So therefore the religion of the majority. And if civil legislation in religious things be right, the majority may legislate in regard to their own religion. Such law made in such a case must be right laws, and the enforcement of them therefore can never be persecution. So in their eyes, in their own eyes, they've justified themselves with these laws. And that is the danger why America was founded upon a separation of church and state. That is why you have to have religious exemptions. As you break down those barriers, it will certainly cause the persecution of some. And that is why these principles existed, these laws existed, to protect and to prevent an overreaching and an overstepping. Okay, great. Glad you're still here. Thank you for continuing with the Alarmist Report. So we're continuing, we're looking at laws, and we're recognizing that laws play a key role in affecting how we enjoy liberties, how we access things, how we're able to move freely, how we're able to live and enjoy our lives. That is why the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal by God and are bestowed with certain inalienable rights in the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And that was written for a reason. The Constitution of the United States was written for a reason. As a matter of fact, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence are actually universal principles. They are God's principles as it pertains to how each nation, each world is to live and respect their citizens. However, we see that we're living in a different time, and we understand that there are certain spirits that are possessing the leaders, and it is somewhat oppressive in nature. But we'll be focusing on this particular law. Many persons were caught off guard. We were all caught off guard when it came to COVID-19. But there was actually a law that came before COVID-19 even came. And that law actually set the stage for many of what which pertains to the vaccine to have taken place, even leading up to the vaccine mandates. And so many persons would have overlooked it. But I just like to use this as a stepping stone to show how critical the laws are, and then to go into our second segment that pertains to a recent law and what implication it could possibly have for us. All right, so are we ready? But before I get into the explanation of this law, please take a look at this video.
There may and likely will come a time in which we have both an airborne disease that is deadly. And in order for us to deal with that effectively, we have to put in place an infrastructure, not just here at home, but globally, that allows us to see it quickly, isolate it quickly, respond to it quickly. So that if and when a new strain of flu, like the Spanish flu, crops up 5 years from now or a decade from now, we've made the investment.
Okay, so as you just saw that video, he explained that in 2014, he explained that in 5 years, 10 years, there may be something like an airborne disease. It was very specific. An airborne disease is something close to the Spanish flu, and around that time there was the Ebola issue, but Ebola was not an airborne disease. So he was very specific and very interesting, that he said that in 2014. Well, as you follow along with me, as we go through these chain of events, we'll recognize that we cannot take laws simply, and we cannot just think of them as just another piece of article on a paper, but we should understand how it affects our daily lives. All right, so in 2014 this statement was made, and this special act that was passed that I'll be focusing on was actually passed in 2016, but I won't name that act as it. I'm going to leave it for last, but we're going to go through some thread of events. So it says here, in 5 years time, actually 5 years time from 2014, as he stated, December also, COVID-19, as you can see on your screen, the virus which would spark a pandemic was first reported in China on December 31st, 2019. As we know, before that, the virus was actually, but China was accused of not sharing information early enough or sufficiently enough. So 5 years, 2019, it came on. As you can see on your screen, January 2020, CDC confirms the first laboratory case of COVID-19 in the US. Then now, by May 2020, President Trump announces Operation Warp Speed, right? And by December of 2020, FDA takes key action in fight against COVID-19 by issuing emergency use authorization for first COVID-19 vaccine, and that is taken from the official FDA website. And then now, by December, few days after, the first COVID-19 shot was administered, and you can see there were the first persons in America to take it was actually a nurse. It says here, the weapon that will end the war. Well, somehow that war has not ended. That war is still going on. The first corona vaccine shots given outside trials in US. Operation Warp Speed from May to December, literally 6 months. The 5th to the 12th, approximately 6 months to develop a vaccine, roll out the vaccine, so that persons can have access to that vaccine. I mean, this should give us insight to certain things, but that's not the focus of this as the aspect of the topic that we'll be focusing on. What we see here now, right after the first shot was administered in December of 2020, 2021 became a year of vaccine oppression, social restrictions and restrictive demands, and many demands upon society, right? Now, it's also important to add that the emergency use authorization also came 5 years after this law. So what law am I referring to here? Well, it is called, as you can see on your screen, directly from the FDA's website, it is the 21st Century Cures Act, signed into law on December 13, 2016. It says it was designed to help accelerate medical product development and bring new innovations and advances to patients who need them faster and more efficiently. The law builds on FDA's ongoing work to incorporate perspectives of patients into the development of drugs, biological products, and devices in FDA's decision-making process. Cures enhance our ability to analyze modern clinical trial design, including the use of real-world evidence and clinical outcome assessments, which will speed the development and review of the novel medical products, including medical countermeasures. Oh boy, if you read that carefully, you'll understand what they're saying. That is why many persons were concerned that it was experimental in nature. Read that carefully over on your own. So based on what we are seeing here from the 21st Century's Cure Act, if persons had carefully actually delve into what this sentence means when it says that to cures enhances our ability to modernize clinical trial designs, including the use of real-world evidence and clinical outcome assessment, which will speed the development and review of medical products, including medical countermeasures, then persons would have recognized that, hey, this here is a loophole for an experimental run. This here is a loophole for something that took 6 months to be developed and distributed to be tested upon civilization en masse. And so, as emphasizing the object of this first section, overlooked the law before COVID vaccine mandate, 2021 would not have occurred. 2021 would not have occurred with all its oppressive demands if this law, the 21st Century's Cure Act, was carefully examined. And that is why we're showing that many times there are good intentions, but at the same time they should be carefully assessed, because these laws can be used, as we said, to restrict, and they can be used to allow. Seems to be a good thing to have a product available quickly, but we can see that this here opened the door. The vaccine was available quickly, it was distributed quickly, but we also see that it provided the real world evidence that they also needed, which, as we understand, vaccines development now will take over 5 years. And so something was brewing behind the scenes here. But the lawmakers, that was important when it comes to lawmakers and policymakers, to pay careful attention to them and what they're doing, because it has great implication on what we're doing, on the lives and the choices and the quality of happiness that citizens experience. The 21st Century Cures Act, or 21st Century Cures Act, or the Cures Act, signed into law December 2016, 2 years before, 2 years after Obama made his speech. Then 5 years after, in December, then 5 years after 2014, that speech, we had the COVID-19 crisis. So this tells us that we should pay careful attention to the laws. But then now, do we just stop there? Well, there's another declaration that has been made that we need to pay careful attention to. And now, I think, having laid the foundation with this first explanation, you should be able to discern what will be in this next declaration, or should I say decree, even though they state it is not legally binding. But that is what we're going to be assessing in our next segment. Thank you for watching. Please continue watching, and remember to share, like, and subscribe with friends and family members, because these things are very critical to liberty. To now add to that, Washington Post came out with their article as it pertains to the 21st Century Cures Act to actually establish what I've been sharing with you. It says the health tool tool. The 21st Century Cures Act helped accelerate COVID vaccines. You gave them the tool to accelerate it. You gave them the tool to get real world information. You gave them tool to review it and also seemingly to release it again. And it says, and lawmakers say their new version could do more. Now, this article is in August 3rd, 2021, but they're now saying that the existence of the 21st Century Cures Act now, based on having gone through the first run, it's more likely to help them to do more. I wonder what that more may include. And so we have to pay careful attention to this 21st Century Cures Act. And so we go over here to one lawmaker. It says the increased powers of the FDA for early approval, allowing them to put together Operation Warp Speed. So you actually see that one law was birthed out of another. One initiative was birthed out of another. Operation Warp Speed was birthed out of the fact that the first law existed, the 21st Century Cures Act existed in the first place. And that is what gave the machinations to the Operation Warp Speed to be executed. And it says here the money they put behind it wasn't because of 21st Century Cures Act, but increased the ability to be nimble. A lot that came from it, right? And so we see here that we can't take these things lightly. We have to pay attention to these laws. We have to give them the importance that we want. We have to let lawmakers know that we don't agree or we disagree with this, because it is definitely going to affect our liberty when laws in themselves go outside of the norm for due process. And you talk about emergency disaster risk management act and these emergency acts that just drastically take away rights and freedom because you're deemed to be under some terroristic threat, they can be abused, historically proven. And so I encourage you to be careful as it pertains to the laws that we support, thinking that they can be for good, and also to raise an alarm concerning these laws so that other persons can be educated, because the majority of persons don't even know what their lawmakers are making and prescribing for them. It's amazing how they call persons who actually said that it was an experimental vaccine conspiracy theorists and weirdos, given that the law actually said that it would be for the purpose of reviewing and reusing information, real-time world data. Very fascinating. It shows you that the uninformed can be great agents and supporters of misinformation and disinformation. It's sad to say misinformation and disinformation even comes from authorities themselves, and we need to be understanding. We need to understand these principles.